What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to the channel and welcome back to... Fuck! Today's video is about a recent A24 film called I Saw the TV Glow. I was originally going to have a video on this movie a couple months back when the movie came out on streaming, but you made me wait to watch it with you.
I wanted to watch it with you.
You guys know who I am. Who are you?
Hi, I'm Lucas. I am an actor, author, and artist.
Lucas is the boyfriend that you guys have heard me talk about in pretty much every video. Yeah, he's an absolute menace to society, which is why I have decided to have him in this video, talking about a really disturbing and fucked up movie. So, I Saw the TV Glow was written and directed by Jane Schoenbrunn. This was her feature directorial debut as far as I know, and we both watched this movie last night, and we're really excited to talk about it. I'm currently on a trip visiting him, obviously, so that's why the background's different. After December of this year, this is probably the background you can expect for most of my videos, or at least all of my videos will be in this room, because I'm going to be living here after December, which will be really, really cool.
It's going to look very different
it is going to look very different, and you're also going to be seeing him in a lot more videos. But anyway, so yeah, we both watched this movie last night. If you have not seen the movie, I'm just going to warn you up front, this video is going to contain spoilers. We may not go through the entire movie chronologically, but we are going to be following the Wikipedia complete plot synopsis so that we hit the major beats that we want to hit. For the first part of the video, though, anyone who hasn't seen it, you are safe, because we're just going to give our general thoughts on the movie without spoilers, and then we'll let you know again when we're about to talk about spoilers.
So this movie reminds me a lot of Wes Anderson's Asteroid City, in the sense that after watching it, I kind of stared at the screen and was like, what did I just watch? It very much was one of those things where I loved it, but if in that moment, if you had asked me, so what was the plot of the movie you just watched? I would literally look at you and be like, I have no clue.
It's almost impossible, actually, to explain the plot of this movie to someone without just reading the plot synopsis on IMDb.
Yeah.
And even then, I guarantee no paraphrase plot synopsis online would actually do it justice.
I got a few spoilers for this movie, and it still was nothing like I thought it would be, because there's no way to describe what this movie is actually about without being either incredibly vague, not hitting all the points, or just being wrong.
So, this being an A24 film, it was obviously known from the beginning that on a technological level, the visual look of the film, the sound design, the acting, we knew all of that was probably going to be great. Even the A24 movies that are bad tend to have pretty good cinematography, pretty good lighting. I think as we were both watching this movie, probably both of the story is very powerful, as we're going to talk about, but I think one of our favorite things about this movie was the way it looks, the lighting.
The lighting was so beautiful.
He was going on and on about the lighting during this movie.
He thought I was faking it. He thought I was lying. He literally looked at me and he was like, you don't have to pretend to like the lighting just to please my all-knowing superior film knowledge. But I was like, no, I love it.
So Lucas, being an artist, actually knows a lot about color theory, the way colors influence emotions. So without giving anything away, since we're talking about the lighting and the cinematography, how well do you think the lighting in this movie and the color palette played into the emotions that the story was trying to communicate?
I think that it reflected the main character and his or their internal feelings a lot. But I also think it kind of lures you into a false sense of security in a way. The lighting is very beautiful, and it is a beautiful movie, but it is also incredibly disturbing and devastating if you can understand where the characters are coming from in that moment. It's definitely something that somebody who doesn't understand what it's about wouldn't connect well with, but I think that's also why it's very important to immerse yourself in stories of people that don't necessarily relate to you, so that you can look at these stories and say, I haven't experienced this myself, but either I know someone who's experienced it or I've heard of somebody who's experienced it, so I can now put myself in their shoes and understand how this character is supposed to feel and why certain technological things when it comes to lighting and sound design reflect how that character is feeling in the moment.
One of the downsides of modern day Hollywood is that a lot of studio executives, when you're trying to pitch your script, they want you to make it very simple. They want you to name other movies that everyone has seen that you can compare it to so that they get a sense of what you're doing. I have no idea how this writer and director would have pitched this movie, but as we know, A24 tends to choose the movies that they choose to distribute tend to be movies that are not concerned with mainstream trends or traditional filmmaking. The point I'm getting at is that when you look this movie up, it's classified as a psychological thriller, it's classified as a horror film, and while those elements are definitely there and while they're definitely very prominent, I don't think you should go into this movie expecting a particularly viscerally scary movie. The movie is deeply disturbing. It's more so an existential horror rather than blood and gore and jump scares. It's not even very much like other A24 horror films like Hereditary or Midsummer, which were praised for being not so mainstream. Those movies, Hereditary and Midsummer, A24's probably two most popular horror movies, were praised for being against the grain, against the mainstream, very unique filmmaking styles and things like that. But then you have a movie like this that's even more different than those movies and even more unique in its presentation, that it almost makes movies like Hereditary and Midsummer look mainstream and look basic. Now, don't get me wrong, obviously I still love those movies. You haven't seen them yet. What I'm saying is if you have liked A24's horror movies before, don't go into this movie immediately expecting to be fond of it. It's very weird. The structure of the narrative is probably the most unique thing about it, I would say. It's jumping all around in time. It takes place over many, many years of the main character's life, and also a lot of it is visual storytelling, visual metaphors. There is definitely dialogue prominent within the movie, but it is not the sole focus. I think a lot of the storytelling here is happening through the visuals and the mise en scene, so to speak, the blocking of everything, the order of the chronology of the story and everything like that. What did you think of the performances in this film?
They were incredible. There is a scene where one of the main actresses is crawling on the floor with her eyes just absolutely focused on the main character.
Yes.
And the way that she's moving her head and her eyes are wide, and it's just like, it genuinely freaked me out. I was like, what is going on? I will say the characters in themselves can be very misleading in both their intentions and their actions, and that is completely done on purpose, and I liked every minute of it.
This movie is not meant to be... See, we've only watched it once, so it's kind of daunting to do a video on it, but I would say this movie is not meant to be watched just once. I think as soon as the movie ended, I would say I wanted to watch it again, but I actually didn't because it was very late at night and I was very, very tired. We were both very tired. But thinking about it, I do want to watch it again because while I've researched the film a lot since seeing it, and while it is obvious on a first viewing the general message that the movie is going for and what it's a metaphor for, or what it may not be a metaphor for, but nevertheless, I would say it does require a rewatch to fully understand it. So, spoiler-free review in general, I think we both really liked the movie. It's hard to say we liked it or enjoyed it, but if you were to ask us if this is a quality movie, if it is a good movie, critically speaking, I think we'd both say yes. Very good. The cinematography is breathtaking. All the acting is great. The way the story is told, I particularly enjoyed a lot. And there is a deeply horrifying aspect of this movie, but horror and what scares people is probably the most subjective thing in film. There's a lot of big budget movies that most people agree are entertaining, even if they don't agree that are good. When it comes to horror, it's a much more subjective experience. Fear is a very invasive emotion. It can really get to people in many different ways, but people are scared by many different things. So it's entirely possible that you will go into this movie. What are you doing? It is entirely possible that you will go into this movie and not be scared by it at all. And like Lucas was saying before, it is also entirely possible that your enjoyment of this movie will depend on whether or not you can relate to the story and the place that it's very clearly coming from. The movie doesn't force itself into a box. It's not saying that you can't enjoy it if you can't relate to certain experiences, but if you've had certain experiences in your life or you identify with particular things, the movie will definitely hit different for you. I know it hit different for both of us and you in particular. So that's our spoiler-free thoughts on the movie. So if you haven't seen the movie, I hope you've enjoyed this part of the video. Go and watch the movie, and then you can come back to this video. So, final warning, we are about to talk about the chronological events of the film. Spoilers. Leave. Be gone.
What?
What?
I didn't know Alex G made the music. Sorry. Alex G made the music, guys.
Actually, just given our thoughts on the movie and the way it's told, we're not going to go through it chronologically necessarily. I think we're just going to talk about different moments in the movie, the place that we think it's coming from, and things like that. So first thing we should get out of the way right off the bat is some information about the writer and director herself and how it definitely influenced the story of the movie. You have more room to speak on that than I do, so I'm going to let you talk about that.
So the writer of this film is named Jane Schoenbrunn, who is a transgender person who started production and writing for this film 3 months into their hormone therapy. Throughout writing the film, Schoenbrunn decided to deliberately leave out being transgender and coming out as a main, central plot point to the film, specifically to separate it from other films in the genre.
Because there's a lot of movies that deal with themes of being trans that they just think there's no way to tell that story or depict that experience sympathetically unless you just literally have a story literally about a person realizing that they're trans, gaining the strength to come out, or socially, medically transitioning. That's what most movies that deal with this subject matter tend to do plot-wise, and this movie is very different from that, in that if you don't know any trans people, if you yourself do not feel that way, you might watch this movie and walk away with a completely different interpretation. Mm-hmm. If you're just somebody who always felt like an outcast or felt different, felt like you can never be yourself in any given environment, you'll probably relate to this movie on a surface level for sure.
And I can also see this movie being incredibly relatable to people across the spectrum when it comes to LGBTQ plus identities, simply for the fact that it deals very heavily in knowing exactly who you are and who you're meant to be, but shoving it down very consistently and pretending that it isn't there and that it doesn't exist. And so it creates this bubble or this emptiness in your brain or your chest where you're just I know, but I don't want to see it. And so you push it away. A lot of common audiences finding a way to relate to it, but I don't think that the ending in particular would be too as hard hitting as it would for members of the LGBTQ plus community and transgender people specifically, just because the reality of staying hidden away sometimes isn't as dire in certain situations.
This is a movie that I think most people who watch it, even if you don't personally like it or enjoy it, you will at least appreciate the visual look of the movie, and you might appreciate what it's setting out to do, but as we said, it might be hard for certain audience members to completely relate to this movie on a personal level, because if you do some research on this movie, the people who love this movie really do love it, and it's mostly because of how deeply they felt the message of the film hit them. And the trans community in particular felt very understood by this movie, understandably so. It was written by somebody who knows exactly what that experience is like. So this movie hit very deeply for us.
One of the main points that I gathered from the movie, and one of the points that the author actually directly states, is that egg crack moment, which is the sudden realization that who you are and your body is not who you are supposed to be. Or at least in your brain and how it makes sense, you are not supposed to be in this body or feel a specific way, but it does. And it is happening. And it's just like that difficult realization and that struggle where it's like, I want to be normal. I don't want to be like this. I don't want to live a life where I am an outsider or where I am somebody different or strange. I want to be a normal person with a normal life. And I don't want to accept this. And throughout the film, Owen kind of struggles with this, which is the main character. Owen very consistently makes references to this idea that something is wrong. And the characters around him also consistently try to tell him that something's wrong or make note that something is wrong. And almost every single time, Owen rejects it immediately and shoves it away. Except for one particular scene where Owen is kind of having a panic attack. And the next shot, you can see him with his head just shoved into a TV. And he is screaming and he is crying as his stepdad tries to pull him out of the TV. And he is begging his dad to stop and begging him to let him stay inside this like this fantasy world. And then he's washing him in like a bathtub, and Owen is screaming like, "You're not my dad, this isn't real." And I very much feel like this is the only moment in the film where Owen sits there and tries to accept where he is, and he is snapped out of it, which I can very much relate to, and I feel like a lot of transgender people can, when they first come out and they first accept who they really are. They try to indulge themselves, and then someone or something tries to snap them out of it. Somebody tries to yank them right back out of that identity that they've just discovered, whether it be through conversion camps or non-accepting parents or societal expectations and bullying. There is always somebody trying to like yank you out of that and force you back into this little box that they've kind of made for you. And I feel like just like the reaction, I feel like even with the ending, that one scene was where I felt the most emotion, just like a visceral, like disgusting feeling in my chest, but like in a good way, I completely understand how this feels and I hate it kind of way.
Because another big part of the plot that we should probably mention, well, obviously the movie is called I Saw the TV Glow, and it mainly, I don't want to say mainly, but like the heart and soul of the film lies in the 90s. There's a lot of 90s nostalgia, references to like 90s aesthetics in TV shows. And the sort of catalyst for this whole story is the main character, Owen, befriending this girl who's a couple years older than him over this show called The Pink Opaque, which she recommends to him. And he goes over to her house one night to watch it and give it a shot, and he becomes just as obsessed with it as she is. And this girl's name is Maddie, although we later come to realize that that's not who she is at all. That's essentially what this movie is doing. It's also very much exploring how young people who feel different from everyone else, who feel like they don't belong, often resort to fictional stories to find themselves and to help them understand themselves. This is something that a lot of children who are also raised very sheltered and who are not taught that, you know, there's many different ways of life and things like that, can find themselves in fictional media. And I personally do not identify as transgender, but as a queer man, I also found myself relating to the movie in that way, because there were a lot of shows and movies that I watched as a kid that just helped me felt understood, that didn't necessarily have queer themes or undertones or anything like that, but, you know, had dealt with themes of not feeling like you belong and things like that.
And I do relate to that aspect of the movie a lot as well, especially in the sense that growing up I never had characters that I could relate to, because for one, I didn't even know who I was at that point, but also being as sheltered as I was, I didn't like have characters or people or celebrities and idols that I could look at and go, that's what I'm feeling right now. Instead, I identified more with male characters such as Jack Frost from Rise of the Guardians and Dipper from obviously Gravity Falls, which I know a lot of transgender men can relate to. But it's just like I never understood why these characters spoke out to me so much. And I think immersing myself in fiction was definitely a coping mechanism for me, especially when I actually did figure out who I was and I started identifying more with people and characters who were like me as I started to actively seek them out. I found so much comfort in TV and media and video games that for a while it was my entire life. I started to drift away from my friends. My relationship with my family at the time started to deteriorate to the point where I would be grounded from watching certain TV shows and hiding in my room because I was spending so much time doing that they were starting to think I was doing something nefarious. And overall, I just started to sink into like a hole, basically.
If you haven't watched the movie and you're still watching the video, like you're somebody who doesn't care about spoilers and you're hearing this and you're excited to go into this movie to experience an uplifting story about somebody finding themselves or anything, this is not the movie for you, because at the end of the day, this is still a psychological horror film, an existential horror film. Like we said, not in your face scary, but a very scary concept, because now that we're in the spoiler section, this movie does not have a happy ending, or at least not an ending that either of us interpreted to be a happy ending.
Here's the thing, a lot of people who watched this in the theaters, so we watched it on streaming. So we knew that this movie had a time limit. We would pause it in certain intervals to get food or water or whatever, and we knew exactly how much time we had left in the movie. And so at a certain point in the movie, we realized we've gotten through this much. We have this much time. It's not going to be a happy ending. And we could look at that and take that. But for people who watched this movie in theaters, they had no idea how long it was going to be. They had no idea when it was going to end. And they had no idea at what point in the movie they were in. We could go and pause it and be like, oh, we're in like the last third of the movie. But I think for common audiences, it was particularly shocking how the movie ended because of how unexpected it really is.
I think that was one of my favorite aspects of the movie too, is that it's extremely unpredictable to an extent. There are certain things that happen where like, yeah, I saw that coming. We also went in knowing a lot about what the movie was about. You had some stuff spoiled for you. I didn't. Just minor spoilers, I'm assuming. I didn't have anything ruined for me whatsoever. So for my experience watching it, I found it very unpredictable. I think it's towards the middle of the movie, because for a while you think Maddie and Owen are like the two main protagonists of the movie, and it's going to be them and their journey the entire time. I thought it was going to be more grounded, and that it was just going to be about two queer people. One of them's trans. Maddie in the movie explicitly states that she's a lesbian. So I just thought it was going to be about two queer people who befriend each other and help each other realize who they are, getting lost in this fictional reality and having this show that they, find themselves in. I thought it was going to be more grounded, but this is actually a very psychedelic movie. It plays around with time. It plays around with what is real and what isn't. Is this happening in a character's head? Is it not happening in a character's head? And honestly, I don't even think we're at a point where we can definitively say which scenes were real and which scenes were not. Obviously, the scenes that take place within the world of the fictional show, in the universe of the movie, obviously those aren't actually physically happening in the real world itself. But also, who's to say that it's not a genuine other reality that legitimately exists? It's a very weird movie, very hard to understand just from like a cosmic perspective. There's, as I said, there's a lot of things going on with time and space in this movie. It's very psychedelic. It's a very trippy experience.
See, I would like to argue that the world in the TV show is real, only because of how the movie ends and how Owen reacts to basically wasting his life away without accepting who he truly is.
Yeah.
Because although it is a metaphor for being transgender, in this reality, he was something entirely he was somebody entirely differently, and he decided to live his entire life without going back to the reality that he was from.
The two main characters of the TV show, the Pink Opaque, their names are Tara and Isabel. And basically throughout the movie, which actually kind of supports the theory that the world of the Pink Opaque is real, is that we come to realize that the character of Maddie actually is Tara from that show, and that as Owen starts to realize that he is potentially a trans woman, he finds himself identifying with the character of Isabel, and that character's name becomes Isabel, and obviously goes by she, her pronouns from that point forward. The thing about this movie is we talked about how sad it really is and how it has a very depressing ending, is that, as I said, takes place over many, many years. We follow Owen from 7th grade all the way to full adulthood, probably mid-30s, and he never fully realizes his identity. He grows up, he never fully embraces it. He has what we can presume is a heterosexual relationship with kids. He started a family.
He most definitely was not in his mid-30s by the end of that movie. He was like 60.
Oh, sure, yeah, because his hair was graying in the final scenes of this movie. And I think you mentioned how the panic attack scene hit you really hard with his head in the TV. The sequence in this movie that hit me the hardest was actually the final few minutes. Essentially, Owen is completely grown up, and he is, as I said, hasn't accepted his identity. He's working at an arcade, I think it was, an arcade / casino type place.
It's not a casino, it's like a kid's birthday party place.
Yeah.
Like Chuck E. Cheese.
Which is actually fitting thematically, given the fact that he found himself through children's TV shows as a kid. I just now realized that. That's good writing. Basically, this place is hosting a children's birthday party. The staff is hosting a children's birthday party here. And Owen kind of has, I guess what we can assume is another kind of panic attack. He screams, and everybody around him is, like, completely frozen, which is why I think, particularly with this scene, that Owen, like, in the actual, like, objective reality of the movie, didn't actually freak out in front of all these people, didn't actually scream, because everybody was frozen, and he's screaming. He's literally screaming for help. Saying things like, "Get me out of here, help me," things like that. And everybody is completely frozen. It was a really trippy moment. It's kind of like a mindfuck moment for sure. And I think in the objective reality of what was actually happening, Owen was probably just acting really awkward or really weird, not really talking to people, things like that, because after that moment, you see him walking around the arcade trying to apologize to everybody, and nobody is receptive to it or even acknowledging that he's actually saying anything. That whole sequence for me was really, really powerful, just that concept of him literally screaming and nobody noticing him at all. He's like right there, literally like screaming for help, and like, you know, the cliche term, it's a cry for help, and nobody can hear him.
Something that I also noticed about that scene in particular, you kind of get hints throughout the movie that his stepdad is at least verbally abusive, if not physically. He's just a very looming and dark presence all throughout the movie. You get the idea that he is scared to ask his dad for things like watching TV
or going to sleepovers.
Yeah. And he asks his mom to do stuff for him, and he also like has his mom comforting him a lot of the time. And I believe that his mom dies before the TV head scene. Is that right?
Yes.
Which I find very interesting, because I would like to know how that scene would have played out if it was his mom coming to save him, instead of his dad. And if his dad would have even, or if his mom would have even tried to pull him out in the first place, or if she would have just let it happen. During that panic attack scene at the very end, he calls for his mom, and he specifically says mommy, which, God, I see that as that is something that hit me pretty hard when he did that. I almost cried. It's not easy to get me to cry at movies, by the way. It's actually very, very difficult.
Well, this movie was obviously very close to home.
Yeah.
I'm a fucking crybaby. Like, we saw Titanic in theaters, and for me, I just get so swept up in the emotions of any story. It doesn't necessarily need to hit very close to home for me to hit me in the emotions. So when we saw Titanic in theaters, spoilers, it's been out for like 40 years at this point. If you haven't seen it, that's your own goddamn fault. When Jack was dying, obviously I was bawling my eyes out. It wasn't my first time seeing it, but it was re-released in theaters for an anniversary thing, so we went and saw it. And I was like, Lucas, you're gonna cry so hard during this movie. It's so sad. And I had a much more emotional reaction to it than you did.
I didn't start crying until I saw the old people.
The old people holding hands in the bed, Notebook style, if you've seen the Notebook. Yeah. But,
and, like, as their room is, like, literally flooding and they're just holding each other. I think old people are cute.
That is something that you have said that is now on the internet. And it will be on the internet forever.
Yeah, have you ever seen that episode of Teen Titans Go? Where Raven's talking about how cute she thinks old people are? That's me. Not in a weird, freaky, sexual way. But in a, oh my god, I want to, like, squish your little old flappy cheeks.
Are you a Drake fan?
When I was 10 years old, my dad passed away. Most definitely not in the same way as Owen's mother did, but he passed away before I came into realization as to who I am. He passed away when I was 10 years old, and so I never got to talk to him about this stuff. I never got to come to him and tell him who I think I might be. I never got to come to him for comfort, and I never even got the opportunity to ask my dad, would you love me the same if I told you this about me? And so when Owen calls for his mom in that scene, that really broke my heart because he never got the opportunity to even speak to her. The way I interpret the TV head scene is he probably, or it's like an allegory for when you come out to a family member that is unaccepting, and it rips you out of that reality that you built for yourself. And I'm just wondering how different Owen's life could have been if there was a person in his life still alive that would have accepted him for who he is. And it breaks my heart that his mom wasn't there for him in that moment.
There are several layers to this movie. It's not just a surface level, all trans people will relate to this, because it's a analogy or a metaphor for realizing that you are trans or queer or any identity that doesn't fit into the boxes that society creates for us. There are also a lot of layers like that. Like, if you have ever lost a parent who you felt more comfortable confiding in than other parental figures in your life that you're forced to stay with after that other parental figure passes, you might also relate to this movie in a certain way. I found myself relating to that aspect of it as well. And so it's not like this is just a one and done thing when it comes to the themes. There are a lot of different themes here. Obviously, the overarching thing is this character realizing that he's not who people have tried to convince him he is his entire life. But there are other themes present here that I think people will be able to relate to, like the loss of a parent, or just anyone who has ever felt more comfortable in fictional worlds rather than our real world. Things like that. A lot of millennials, actually, are really enjoying this movie because of the attachment to 90s and early 2000s nostalgia. As kids, the shows they watch growing up as kids on VHS tapes, which is what Owen and Maddie do because they're growing up in the late 90s. And very accurate depiction of the visual aesthetic of 90s television as well. Just with the aspect ratio and the the grainy like digital camera style. Like me and Lucas watched Dawson's Creek together, one of the most popular shows.
Yeah.
It ran into the 2000s, but it started in the 90s, and by most people it's considered a late 90s show. And obviously story-wise, The Pink Opaque and Dawson's Creek couldn't be more different. But like visually speaking, the presentation of it did feel very accurate to 90s television, which I really appreciated, and a lot of 90s kids also seem to appreciate as well. There is that going for it, and I do think the director herself is a 90s kid, so that would definitely make sense.
That
for
one
sure.
teacher in Dawson's Creek and Drake would get along.
Miss Jacobs. I was talking a little bit earlier about how I found this movie really unpredictable. And as I was saying, Owen and Maddie are our two main characters for a good portion of it, and you think that's how it's going to be the whole time. But around the middle of the film, I think it is, Maddie just goes missing, and presumably goes missing for about a decade. Which I personally didn't expect that to happen, and it kind of felt like my heart was ripped out of my chest because I was really starting to feel that bond between the two of them. And I mean, Owen really goes through a lot of shit in this movie, and it's really hard to watch from time to time. I think the scariest scene in this movie, just in regards to more typical horror stuff, would be the depiction of what was supposedly the final episode of The Pink Opaque.
Oh, God.
With this so-called Mr. Melancholy, who apparently is the main villain of the Pink Opaque universe, which there are a lot of metaphors right there to break down, because the big revelation in this movie, in that scene where Maddie / Tara, or Tara, however you want to say it, is has this amazing monologue, by the way. This would be a really good audition monologue for any other actors out there. It's time for refreshments. We've been talking for a long time. Dwayne. Go.
Oh, I did mine a little.
Listen to that sizzle.
Do like the finger tapping.
You guys like that? Damn, you slurped that thing.
I, for real, for a second, thought that Mr. Melancholy was gonna get freaky with Isabel. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was...
That was so uncomfortable.
That was very uncomfortable. He does lick her face. Very uncomfortable. A lot of really interesting metaphors with Mr. I mean, first of all, it's not the most subtle metaphor. He's literally called Mr. Melancholy. The most obvious interpretation, because during that revelation scene where Tara sort of helps Isabel / Owen realize who who they really are, she literally says, Mr. Melancholy planted something in you, which I thought was really interesting, because we can assume that that plant, so to speak, would be the Owen's true identity as a trans woman, or not necessarily just a trans woman, just trans feminine in general, things like that, because there's other identities as well. And I love the idea of that metaphor, because it wouldn't necessarily have made sense if this movie had a happy ending, where he came to realize who he was, came into his own skin, their own skin, their own identity, and that kind of thing. But because of the way the movie ends, I think it's very fitting that his transness is more so seen as a source of melancholy for him, not because of the identity itself, because obviously this is a very pro-trans movie, and a lot of trans people have found solace in it, but and comfort in it. But it's just the fact that the existential horror of it for me is that, and the reason Mr. Melancholy is a villain, is that maybe Mr. Melancholy implanted this into this character knowing that Owen would never be able to come into his own skin, and still put that in him just to make him suffer. Which, if we're looking at this movie just from your classic good versus evil story, Mr. Melancholy would be the perfect villain for this character, and that is a very hostile thing to do. This might piss some people off, but you could equate it to organized religion and people who have issues with it, in the sense that, why would God do this knowing that I would go through so much pain? And it sort of goes into this idea of Mr. Melancholy put this true identity inside of Owen, knowing that Owen would never be able to fully come into it, and therefore knowing that it would cause him so much pain.
That's so interesting. because the way I saw it was the exact opposite of what you're saying right now. The way that I saw it was that Mr. Melancholy was quite literally sending Isabel to purgatory. It's like Isabel's own personal hell where she isn't allowed to know who she used to be or who she is supposed to be. But she finds out anyway because of Tara. Tara comes back for her. Tara comes back to tell her who she really is, and this is like a breaking point for her, where her life just like completely shatters because now she knows and she can't do anything about it unless she is willing to like literally bury herself and who she used to be alive so that she can get back, or so that she can become who she feels like she is supposed to be. And in that sense, I do agree with you that Mr. Melancholy could be a allegory for an incredibly cruel god who sends people into this world knowing that he created them in a separate way than they will want to be, and they will have to live with that for the rest of their life. Literally the exact opposite of what you said, just like kind of flipped around.
Yeah.
You know?
Which that's the great thing about this movie too, is that it's not forcing one interpretation on you. There are several things that you can walk away with that are almost equally as powerful. I love that interpretation. And maybe on a rewatch that'll hit me even more now that you've just explained it to me. Yeah, I found Mr. Melancholy as this looming antagonist in like the last third of this movie to be really effective. And fucking creepy, by the way. It kind of reminded me of the Mandela catalogs, the way his face was. Especially when
he was like...
When his...
You know?
Do that again?
When he was like... It was so freaky. I can't even do it right. I also would like to come back to that point of literally having to bury yourself alive in the movie, because I mean
this video is not sponsored, by the way. That's not the end that...
You want to sip my whoopie?
I'm done.
Whoopie.
Enjoy the channel.
Whoopie.
Talk to them, Lucas. This is your home now.
Y'all want to see my ball?
Okay.
Although it was very on the nose, I very much did enjoy the overall theme of having to literally bury yourself alive. Not only was the description that Tara or Maddie giving when she was burying herself alive, like, absolutely disgusting. But also, like, having to convince somebody to also do that with you is like having a friend and knowing who they are and desperately trying to get them to come out. I specifically think that in the universe of the Pink Opaque, Tara and Isabel were in love.
Yes.
And I think that in particular, Tara trying to convince Owen to bury themselves alive with her was this film's way of addressing the issue of a queer partner knowing that their partner is transgender and trying to force them to come out so that they can be together in a more, like, I guess, sanitized or more
socially acceptable
way.
And that's not something we've experienced that intensely. Lucas had already socially transitioned long before I ever met him and long before we ever started dating. But we would be lying if we said that there haven't been points in our relationship where the fact that we are not only a queer couple but also technically speaking a trans couple, that because you're trans, not that I'm trans, 50% trans couple.
50%. Half and half.
Half and half right here. I think we'd be lying if we said that nature of our relationship hasn't resulted in some actual struggle. I mean, there's, you know...
There's even been situations where I've been like, I can pretend to be a girl for you.
Yeah, which, by the way, I've never taken
That
him
has
up
never
on.
happened.
I've never taken him up on. I've always been like, no, be yourself. Fuck anyone who doesn't. I'm not trying to be a pick-me, but, you know. Why are you giving that to me? That's not mine.
I told you could have a sip.
I don't want your trans agenda elixir, mister.
The new norm ain't the same
As the old norm. Also, I feel like what we were just talking about in regards to the TV show The Pink Opaque itself and the queer undertones that were probably in that show actually speaks true to real life a lot, because now when we look back at history, there was a point in cinema and TV where the regulation stated that you could not have explicitly homosexual characters depicted on screen. But now we can look back at history and gay artists who were making TV shows and movies, just by the nature of the fact that it was queer people making them. There were queer undertones that could be found in the films and old TV shows, where it's like maybe there's not an openly queer couple, but there are undertones, or maybe there's some like tension between them because people were trying to see what they could get away with and things like that. And it's no wonder that so many elderly queer people of today, if you were to ask them about like shows they grew up watching, you will find that they related to those shows and they found comfort in those shows so much because they related to certain characters. Then you go back and you look at those characters, you study the shows, look at theories of undertones, and there are a lot of queer undertones and things like that. So I think it's interesting that The Pink Opaque itself doesn't seem to be an explicitly queer show, but there are it's queer coded in the sense that the two main characters very much seem to be a little bit more than friends, but the show can never explicitly state that. Mm-hmm. So I also thought that that was also a really good reflection of reality. On another side of that, I also really loved how when the scenes of The Pink Opaque that you see in this movie when the main characters are kids are much scarier and a little bit more visually disturbing than they are later in the movie when Owen is watching the show as an adult and it just looks like a cheesy 90s poorly produced, children's show, obviously, which I also really loved. Growing up, I loved Scooby-Doo, specifically the Mystery Incorporated incarnation that was airing in the early 2010s. And specifically, I remember the very first episode of that show fucking horrified me as a kid. That was the one with like the green slime monster. Remember as a kid, the design of that creature and the animation of it and the sound effects of it really fucking scared me. Like, it genuinely scared me. I remember sort of having like a mini panic attack watching that when I was really young, but I also like really loved it and also saw myself in a lot of the themes in that show because that's one of the more mature incarnations of Scooby-Doo and it's very funny. But now I go back and watch that show and it's still very funny as an adult because there's actually a lot of adult humor and jokes in that show, so it makes it enjoyable as an adult. But obviously now I see that slime monster and I'm like, this is kind of goofy. Like, how was I ever scared by this? But when you're a kid, there's certain things like that are probably objectively not scary, objectively goofy, that you do find terrifying just because you're looking at it through the eyes of a child. That's something the movie Skinamarink also does very well. You haven't seen that yet.
I've seen videos about it.
Wendigoon did a video about it. Really loved his analysis of it. And he actually made some very good points in that video about how when you're a kid, waking up in your house in the middle of the night, and we're talking like 4 to 10 years old, just somewhere in that range. When you wake up in the house in the middle of the night, all the lights are off and it's dead silent. That's horrifying when you're that age. Now when it happens, sure, maybe it's a little tense, but the objective reality of the situation is that you're probably fine. And so I really like that this movie also explored that. Now that I talk about it, that's probably honestly one of the most impressive aspects of this movie is that it's dealing with so many different themes and references and analogies to the real world and somehow manages to feel cohesive and well written. A lot of times stories can feel discombobulated if they're trying to go for way too many themes and they can't just lock on one. This movie to me felt very cohesive, very intact, and just very narratively and structurally sound, which is even more impressive when you consider the fact that this is this writer and director's feature debut.
See, I still believe that even though it goes for the theme of kind of like childhood trauma when it comes to TV shows and movies and how they seem silly when you get older, I still don't necessarily believe that the pink opaque that Owen was watching when he was older was the same pink opaque as when he was a kid. I think that there being that drastic of a shift in the way that the TV show is filmed and the themes and the characters makes it feel like somewhere down the line what Tara had done fundamentally changed their reality in the way that the TV show was distributed, I guess. Like, I still don't think that was real.
That's an interesting interpretation. I don't know if I agree. Just because personally, in my own personal experience, and this honestly might just be a personal preference thing in regards to the way stories are told, I personally really like the idea that it was the same show. It's just he was now watching it through the eyes of an adult rather than the eyes of a child, and therefore was interpreting it differently. Because there's also narration by his character throughout the movie, and in that scene he was saying that he was going to watch the pink opaque again on the VHSs he had, but that it was on streaming services now because at this point in the movie it's modern day. And he says that they put the whole show on streaming, and so he could watch it on streaming, and he goes and watches it, and then it's like that. So I don't think it was like a reboot. It's also still the square aspect ratio and the VHS style. So
I would have liked to see him revisit the VHSs just to see.
I would have liked to see him revisit the VHSs, although it is very realistic that's just on streaming. Because there's so much nostalgia for VHS, and basically nobody watches movies on VHS anymore, but you go to a lot of movie YouTube channels and there's VHS aesthetics all over the place.
Yeah.
Like the scratching of the film and the sound of the VHS going into the VCR, whatever it's called, DVR.
Because it's nostalgic.
There's this theory that a lot of people subscribe to, that the weaknesses of one generation's technology will later be viewed as their strengths. For example, people were really scared that vinyl was going to go out of fashion when DVDs came around, like CDs that people could listen to music on. Then, of course, streaming music and things like that. And now, every time a major artist releases new music, there are a million different versions of the vinyl. Mm-hmm. And things like that. And people are obsessed with vinyl again. I also really like vinyl. Mm-hmm. I had my own record player and a bunch of vinyl, but it got destroyed in a flood. That was not nice. Oh yeah, so there's like 3 very devastating things that all happen in quick succession. Owen's mother dies, Maddie goes missing, and the pink opaque itself as a show is canceled. And I think it was after that, Owen comes across a fallen power line in the middle of the street, and he finds a paper that says the pink opaque season 6 episode 1, which is interesting because we later find out in the film that the show itself actually ended with season 5.
Does he ever read off what the episode title is?
I don't think so. I think it might have been written on screen, because throughout this movie there's like title cards that appear to be like being handwritten on the movie itself, like on the screen in like a pink font.
See, because that's something that was never addressed again. There was like a broken power line. The power line was whipping back and forth, and like there were papers everywhere showing like the different seasons, but they were for seasons that didn't exist yet. They never really revisit that. They never really go, this is what was supposed to happen, which furthers my theory that the pink opaque that Owen watched isn't the same one when he goes back to rewatch it, because conceptually there had to have been something done within like time or something like that like there something had to have been changed, which I personally believe that a season 6 already existed, but because of Owen's refusal to go with Tara, he kind of like made it not exist anymore, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Because we have proof that in some, like somewhere in time, in some alternate reality or some timeline, season 6 existed.
Mm-hmm.
It had to have existed.
Yeah.
But Owen not going with Tara.
Okay, so Maddie / Tara, when she returns after a decade of being missing, she says that she was in the pink opaque. Mm-hmm. I think the objective pink opaque show that existed like in the real world ended after 5 seasons. And then where season 6 starts, since Owen finds that right after Maddie goes missing, it probably means that the pink opaque that Maddie was existing in, like the second Maddie went missing, that's when season 6, aka the alternate reality that she was trapped in, started.
Because when she came back, she told Owen that Isabel has to come back so they can start season 6. So that wouldn't work.
I don't think she said season 6. I think she said
so we can get to season 6.
I don't think she said that.
She
I think
said
she said
that
season 8.
Very, very directly.
He's right, guys.
I told you so.
The scene in the movie that actually got me to cry was a scene towards the very, very end of the movie when Owen retreats into the bathroom at this birthday party that this arcade he's working at is hosting, and cuts himself open with a knife. It's not bloody or gory. The sound effect is very disturbing, and visually it's a disturbing sight. But that's because it's obviously a metaphorical image. So he literally cuts himself open, and then stands in front of the mirror, and he like opens his torso like this, and you see the glow of what I presumed was supposed to represent the glow of a TV screen coming out of his body. And I think the sounds that you're hearing are not only the sounds from the Pink Opaque show, obviously because he found himself in that show, but also sounds of conversations he and Maddie had as kids. I think I also heard some audio. Again, the sound design in this movie is also really, really good. And the music by Alex G is also very good. I love
Alex G.
Lucas loves Alex G.
That scene in particular I found very, very devastating. The fact that he's
smiling.
Old. He is, but he's also old. And he's basically dying. And we can see through like how slow
he has a hard time getting around and a hard time speaking.
You could see when he starts to try and cut open the box, he has a hard time getting things open on his own, and he's getting weak. And the fact that he is probably going to die as Owen, it was very, very devastating for me to just see like him laying on the bathroom floor, knowing what his life could have been, and finally accepting it, only for it to be too late. One of the main themes all throughout this movie, this phrase is not only repeated, but it's also written down, is "there is still time."
That's the last shot of the movie. It's Owen walking down the middle of a street, and it says "there is still time." So I guess in a way, it's not a completely sad ending.
It isn't.
I think that also might speak... It's a bittersweet ending for me. More bitter than sweet, but a little bit of sweetness there, because you also hear stories of trans people who didn't come into their own skin until they were in their 60s.
Yeah.
Didn't come into their own skin until they were very old. And the advice that they always give to young trans people who are scared to come out, who don't feel safe, is they literally say, there is still time, you still have time, you have so much life left to live, it's not over yet. So there's a lot of tear-jerking things in this movie. The very sad idea that Owen never found his skin, but also the very emotionally, I guess, tears of joy idea that there is still time. It's just a very bittersweet kind of message. And the fact that it's literally written on the street, too. I think it's very clear that the director was trying to give a little bit of hope to the story. Because if that "there is still time" bit wasn't there at all, I don't think people would actually appreciate this movie as much. People don't want an entirely depressing ending very much anymore. It can be done well, but it's also just kind of a fucking bummer. And this movie is a bummer, and it's not a happy ending. But I like that little thing was there for the people watching the movie who, in order to enjoy the movie, would need at least a semblance of hope.
Well, that, and I think it is directly speaking to its transgender viewers, regardless of if they've already come out, if they're thinking about coming out, if they haven't even realized that they're transgender yet. It's basically like literally spelling it out for them on the screen that there is still time for you.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to live your life and have it end like this. And in that sense, I do feel like it might be a little bit of a cautionary tale.
I was just about to say that, yeah.
The movie telling you, like, this is where you could end up if you decide that it's not worth it to transition. Because if you genuinely are feeling like that, it is always worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if you're not in a safe position, or if you feel like you have a lot to lose, whether it be like financial, like specifically financially, or like within a job position, I completely understand being hesitant, but it all comes back to that little point of there's still time. You have time to figure it out. You have time to figure out how you're going to do it. You have time to figure out what and who you are and what you're comfortable with. There is time. I find that very beautiful, but I just find it a very beautiful message to kind of display after such a devastating and like
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
After such a crushing realization that Owen did not find he found his true identity, but he didn't ever come into it.
Mm-hmm.
But also, it's not necessarily even an entirely depressing ending for Owen, because it's not like he's dead at the end of this movie. He's still alive, and also him walking down that road that says there is still time, that could also be interpreted as he has actually chosen. He's literally walking down a road, a path, so to speak, that says there is still time on it. That could very much, by a more optimistic audience member, be interpreted as him finally choosing to take the first steps on that path to actually finding his happiness, which would also make me cry just as much, because that's also just as beautiful. So really, anyway, there's not really a bad interpretation of this ending for me. I feel like no matter what ending you walk away with an interpretation of, each ending is great. Nobody's probably made this comparison, but it reminded me of Detroit Become Human in that way, with the multiple endings that could possibly be interpreted. I think a lot of people tend to think that a movie, it's like it is a finished product, and therefore it has one definitive ending, and it doesn't matter what your interpretation is, because the person who made it has their version of the ending. But the whole beauty of film and the whole reason so many artists and writers and directors choose to withhold their own interpretation is because so much of the point of it, and just art in general, is one of the big motivations to put it out into the world is so that other interpretations can be had, and is so that your art is not only contained within the box of your own imagination, because you have your vision, but when you put it out there for other people to experience, the whole beauty and motivation behind that is so that other people can have their own subjective experiences with it and have their own interpretation of the ending. The reason I compare it to Detroit Become Human is that no matter what ending you get in that game, it's probably thematically and emotionally, at least, a very powerful and good, well-written ending. Same with the multiple endings this movie can have based on the multiple and different interpretations. I also think, based on all the different interpretations of what we just discussed, are all quality endings, like well-written endings, whether it be he never found happiness and never came into his own skin, and it's just a really depressing ending. It's depressing, but it's a good ending. It's powerful. It's also a horror film that's meant to scare you, and that is a very scary idea. But also the bittersweet ending. Owen never came into his own skin, but the movie is giving you the message that that doesn't have to be your future, and that doesn't have to be your journey. You still have time. Or the third option that we discussed, Owen walking down that street that says there is still time, could be symbolizing that he is finally choosing, no matter how old he is, to take those steps to finally be happy. So all three of those endings, for me, in my opinion, are great regardless. And I just think that's a sign of a really well-written movie and a really well-told story. The fact that it is so open-ended, but no matter what interpretation of the ending you have, it works and is consistent with everything else that happened in the movie. Okay, guys, sorry that was such a chaotic and all over the place discussion, but if you've seen the movie, you were probably able to enjoy it. If you didn't see the movie, this was probably really fucking confusing for you. Like I said, go watch the movie and then come back to the video. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and the discussion nonetheless. I hope you guys enjoyed seeing Lucas on the channel. I love him.
You're not that dude.
You're right.
I am, though.
Guys, I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you would like to follow my personal, professional, and creative endeavors outside of just the YouTube channel, you can follow me on Instagram at @TheXavierReichbaum. Also, be sure to check out my podcast, the Headspace Podcast, which is now on all major podcast streaming platforms, most namely Spotify and Apple Podcast. Lucas, where can they find you?
So up until November, I'm going to be on TikTok at LucasIsAthing. Also Instagram with Lucas.isAthing, and my Twitch is LucasIsAthing. So
You are a thing.
Yeah.
What kind of thing are you? Whatever the fuck that means. Guys, thank you so much, as always, for watching. I will see you in the next video. I don't want to do my intro with someone else, my outro with someone else in the room. It's embarrassing. I will see you in the next video, and until then, keep writing, keep shooting, and keep editing.
Pew, pew.
The fuck was that?
Keep shooting.
Happy back to school season, kids. Alright, we're good. Come on. He's a menace. He's a menace.